Hi everyone, we're now moving on to our final composer of Module 1, and that's George Friedrich Handel. So, Handel was born in Halle, Germany in the year 1685, which ideally you would have identified as Bach's birth year as well, although he did actually end up outliving Bach by around 9 years. We get this pretty remarkable quote from Beethoven. To him I bend the knee, for Handel is the greatest composer that ever lived. I can still learn from him. Okay, this is pretty interesting because I don't know if there's many people now, and I'm recording this video in 2021, who would consider Handel to be a more important, more instrumental composer than Bach in the creation and the evolution of music history. Nevertheless, I think this quote really can demonstrate just how big of a deal Handel was in the Baroque period. And because Beethoven is making this quote, we also know that he remained a big deal into the classical period. He was sort of the musician, kind of, I think, the Ed Sheeran of his day. So I want to sort of quickly sum up Handel's early life, and here's the important points. George was the son of a barber surgeon who discouraged George's desire to pursue music as a career. A barber surgeon is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. We got a barber who also performs surgery. Now, I'm quick to admit that I'm not the world's leading expert on barber surgeons, but from what I understand, barbers would often perform surgeries, and apparently were even preferred to medical doctors a lot of the time because A, they had the tools to do the work, or a lot of it at least, i.e. sharp objects, and B, they also had great hand-eye coordination for obvious barber reasons. So, from what I gather here, you could go and get your beard trimmed, and maybe also get some bloodletting done at the same time. Now, George's dad wasn't exactly keen on his kid becoming a musician, but at some point when Handel was in his late single digits, he went with his dad to a town called Winstonfels. While he was there, Handel, George, that is, the son, somehow got his hands on the organ in the court chapel and was overheard playing by Duke Johann Adolf I. The Duke talked to Handel's dad and said that, well, this kid has talent and it needs to be fostered. He needs to be taught. The Handels go back to Halle, back home, and the older Handel, the dad, gets his kid George to study with Friedrich Wilhelm Zachau, who is the organist in the church in Halle, and as it turns out, actually the only teacher Handel would ever study under. Under Zachau's guidance, Handel became a solid organist and composer. Handel's dad died in 1697, but for reasons that are unclear, Handel didn't decide to go pursue a musical career immediately. Instead, he went to the University of Halle and put a great deal of effort into studying law, despite not having been properly enrolled in the university's law school. In 1702, however, Handel got a job as an organist at Halle's Calvinist Cathedral, and this is the sort of prelude to Handel's professional life. And now I'm giving you, up on the screen, the sort of chart of Handel's career. These are the four main periods of his career. Hamburg, 1703 to 1706, Italy, 1706 to 1710, Hanover, 1710 to 1712, and London, 1712 to 1759. As you can see, there's a lot of diversity here in terms of location, and this is really important because Handel drew into his compositional style, much in the same way that Bach did, certain aspects of German, Italian, French, and English musical culture. However, the really defining genre of Handel's career was opera, and his exploration of this art form began even before he got to Italy. So because the London period of Handel's life is so long, we're going to be spending a second lecture on that, and today we're going to be going over Hamburg, Italy, and Hanover. And so we turn first to the Hamburg period. It's not entirely clear why Handel actually moved to Hamburg, but what's important is that we see Handel working as both a violinist and harpsichord player in the Hamburg Opera Orchestra. Handel also composes his first two operas, Almira and Nero. even within this short period in Hamburg, we can see just how important opera would turn out to be for this composer, this young composer. Just a quick note on opera. Opera was seen at this point in time, and I actually think this holds quite true in how opera is perceived in popular culture today, as being an elevated art form, since it blended instrumental music, vocal music, and the dramatic arts into one setting. Really pulled all these major art forms together, these high art forms together. And so it's important to note that the creation of an opera wasn't typically a one-person operation. You have the composer, but you'd also almost always have a librettist. A librettist is someone who writes the libretto of a work. That sounds obvious, and let me clarify. A libretto is the text of an opera, oratorio, or cantata, which is usually written by someone other than the composer. So in less pompous terms, the libretto is the lyrics of one of these large-scale works. So you'd have one guy writing the music and another writing the words, sort of like Elton John and Bernie Taupin. In 1706, it's believed that Ferdinando de' Medici, the Grand Prince of Tuscany, invited Handel to Italy. That being said, we have some contradicting accounts stating that Gian Gaston de' Medici, Ferdinando's brother, who he didn't actually get on with that well, invited Handel to Italy. Either way, it seems pretty apparent that a Medici got Handel to come to Italy. And now things are really taken off for George here. He's starting to pal around with some major patrons in the arts in Europe and leaders of church and state. And he travels to places like Florence, Rome, Naples, and Venice. Really big locations. He's also composing operas, cantatas, and oratorios. Now, I want to touch upon oratorio because this is quite important given that the assigned piece for Handel here is from an oratorio, the Messiah. So an oratorio is a large-scale work for soloist, chorus, and orchestra consisting of recitatives, arias, ensembles, and choruses. This genre, developed in the Baroque era, focuses on serious subjects and is generally based on biblical texts. We'll deal with what recitatives and arias are later on, but given that an oratorio is a large-scale work for soloists, crowd, and orchestra, the question has to be asked. What's the real difference between this, an oratorio, and opera? And the answer is, frankly, not much. Oratorios, they just aren't dramatic. There's no acting, no fanfare, no pomp and circumstance. During Lent, this 40-day period of penitential preparation for Easter, the Catholic Church prohibited spectacles such as opera from being mounted. And this is why oratorios got popular. Since the subject matter was religious in nature, and there was no dramatic pageantry involved, oratorio sort of hijacked the opera-going population during Lent. So now we come to this weird little time in Hanover where Handel becomes the Kapellmeister to the Elector of Hanover, George Ludwig. Guessing George is a popular name. The Elector lets Handel take 2 trips to London despite his job in Hanover, and Handel ends up deciding to move permanently to London. Now this is pretty cool because George would eventually move as well. Since in 1714 he becomes the King of Great Britain in Ireland. And we're going to pick up next time right where we left off. Handel moving to London. And that's going to be a full video unto itself, just because it's such a dense period in his life. It's such a long part of his career. And then after that, we're going to move on to the signed repertoire from the Messiah. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in part 2 for this biography lecture.